In the summer of 1976, a series of break-ins began in the east area of Sacramento County. A man in a ski mask, armed with a flashlight and a knife, would case a home for days, then enter at night through an unlocked window or sliding door. He targeted couples. He would bind the man, place dishes on his back, and threaten to kill everyone in the house if he heard the plates rattle. Then he would assault the woman. Police started calling him the East Area Rapist. Between 1976 and 1978, he struck at least 50 times in Sacramento alone, and detectives had almost nothing. No fingerprints that matched anyone. No witnesses who saw his face. Just a pattern and a growing sense of dread across the suburbs. Here is the first open question worth sitting with. Why did a man capable of this kind of calculated, repeated violence never once get caught in the act, across dozens of attacks, in ordinary middle-class neighborhoods? And here is the second. What made him suddenly move 300 miles south and turn from assault to murder? If this case is gripping you already, save this video. You're going to want to come back to this one, because the ending involves a piece of technology nobody in 1978 could have imagined. By 1979, the attacks stopped in Sacramento. But south of the city, in Santa Barbara, Ventura, and Orange County, a new wave of crimes began: home invasions where couples were found murdered. Investigators eventually matched the DNA and ballistics to the same man. They gave him another name, the original Night Stalker. Nobody yet realized these were the same person terrorizing Sacramento years earlier. That link wouldn't be confirmed until 2001 through DNA analysis. We'll get to how that changed the entire shape of the investigation in a moment, and that is where this case gets genuinely counterintuitive, because solving the identity puzzle didn't solve the case. It just made the mystery bigger. Between 1974 and 1986, this offender is now believed responsible for at least 13 murders, more than 50 rapes, and over 100 burglaries across California. His method barely changed. He researched his victims in advance, sometimes for weeks. He knew their routines, their pets' names, their floor plans. He often called victims afterward, sometimes years later, to remind them he was still out there. This wasn't chaos. This was a man exercising total control methodically over a period of 12 years. But here is the pattern interrupt nobody expects. In 1986, after the murder of an 18-year-old victim in Irvine, the attacks simply ended. No more break-ins, no more murders, no note, no arrest, no explanation. For a serial offender operating at this frequency to go completely silent isn't just unusual. Statistically, it almost never happens unless the offender dies, is incarcerated for something else, or loses the opportunity or the physical ability to continue. Investigators were left with a genetic profile, but genetic profiling in 1986 didn't exist yet in any usable form. It would take another decade before DNA evidence could even connect these crimes to each other, and it would take 3 more decades before that evidence could name a name. For over 30 years, the case sat there, a full DNA profile of a killer, sitting in an evidence locker, matching no one in any criminal database on Earth. That's the second open loop we planted at the start, finally starting to close. The case wasn't unsolvable because the evidence was missing. The evidence was sitting right there the entire time. What was missing was a way to read it. By the 2010s, the case had a new name. Journalist Michelle McNamara, writing about the unsolved crimes, coined the term Golden State Killer in 2013, tying the Sacramento attacks and the Southern California murders together for the public for the first time. Her work, published posthumously as the book I'll Be Gone in the Dark, reignited national attention on the case. But the actual breakthrough came from a technique almost nobody outside forensic science had heard of: investigative genetic genealogy. In early 2018, a team led by criminalist Paul Holes took the killer's crime scene DNA profile and uploaded it, not to a police database, but to GEDmatch, a free public genealogy website where ordinary people upload their own DNA results to find distant relatives. The killer had never submitted his own DNA anywhere. But some of his distant cousins had hobbyists curious about their family trees. The genetic profile matched fragments shared with people 3, 4, even 5 generations removed. Investigators then did something almost nobody had done before at this scale. They built out an entire family tree by hand, cross-referencing genealogical records, obituaries, and census data, narrowing hundreds of possible relatives down through the branches until only a handful of names in the right age range in the right part of California remained. One name stood out. 72-year-old former police officer living in Citrus Heights, just outside Sacramento, inside the exact zone where the earliest attacks occurred decades before. His name was Joseph James DeAngelo. Investigators needed to confirm the match without alerting him. They collected a discarded item from his car door handle for a preliminary DNA test. It came back consistent with a familial match. To be certain, they waited, then collected a tissue he had thrown in his own trash. That sample matched the crime scene DNA directly. On April 24, 2018, D'Angelo was arrested in his driveway. The man Sacramento had feared for 2 years, and California had hunted for over 40, had been living an unremarkable suburban life the entire time, working as a mechanic, attending family gatherings, appearing by every account completely ordinary. Here is what genuinely unsettles the investigators, forensic psychologists, and former colleagues who later spoke about D'Angelo. Before any of this came to light, he had been a police officer. He served in Exeter and later Auburn, California, during the very years the attacks were happening in Sacramento. He was fired from the Auburn Police Department in 1979, not for anything connected to the crimes at the time, but for shoplifting a hammer and a can of dog repellent from a drugstore. He left law enforcement and moved into a quiet civilian life, eventually working at a Save Mart distribution center until retirement. Criminal psychologists who studied the case afterward point to a distinct and disturbing pattern. An offender who used his position of authority and his understanding of police procedure to avoid detection, who compartmentalized 2 entirely separate lives with total discipline, and who, unlike offenders driven by impulsive rage, planned each attack with the patience of someone confident he would never be caught by conventional means. The abrupt stop in 1986 remains, in the professional opinion of investigators on the case, most consistent with an offender who recognized that DNA science was advancing and that his risk of exposure was rising, not someone who lost the desire to offend, but someone disciplined enough to stop before evidence caught up with him. What makes this case a genuine turning point isn't just who D'Angelo turned out to be. It's what his capture proved was possible. Investigative genetic genealogy, using public consumer genealogy data to identify suspects through distant relatives, has since been used to help solve dozens of other previously unsolvable cold cases across the country, some decades older than this one. The technique didn't just close one case. It rewrote what unsolvable means in criminal investigation. In June 2020, D'Angelo pleaded guilty to 13 counts of murder and multiple kidnapping-related charges tied to the rapes. Many of the sexual assault charges themselves fell outside the statute of limitations by the time he was identified, which is part of why prosecutors built the case around the murder and kidnapping counts instead. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Dozens of survivors and victims' family members spoke directly to him in court, many for the first time in over 40 years. CTA 1213 Min. Drop in the comments. If you found out a neighbor you'd known for decades was living a secret double life, do you think there'd have been any sign at all, or do cases like this prove that evil really can look completely ordinary? Cases like this are exactly why this channel exists, to walk through how real investigators actually crack cases that sit cold for decades, using evidence, psychology, and science, not speculation. If you want the next breakthrough cold case the moment it goes up, subscribe and hit the bell icon, new case every day. Outro 1315 Min. What the Golden State Killer case leaves behind isn't just the end of one man's 40-year secret. It's proof that patience, the same discipline that let him evade capture for decades, was ultimately no match for a database built by strangers trying to find their long-lost cousins. Justice, in this case, didn't come from a confession or a slip-up. It came from a distant relative's curiosity about their own family tree. But that is only half the story. The technique that caught him has since been quietly reopening cold cases all over the world, some far stranger and far older than this one. If this case hit you, my video on the cold case solved by a single fingerprint left on a window 40 years earlier will make even more sense now. That's where this story goes next. For over 40 years, a serial predator responsible for at least 13 murders and more than 50 assaults across California lived as an ordinary neighbor, a former police officer, a mechanic, a grandfather. This is the true story of how investigative genetic genealogy, a technique built on a public genealogy website, finally identified him decades after the last attack. This video walks through the timeline of the crimes, the decades-long forensic dead end, the breakthrough that connected a DNA profile to a family tree, and the psychology behind an offender disciplined enough to stop before science caught up with him. 00, 00, the unanswered question 00, 45, who he was hunting 02, 30, the pattern nobody could stop 0510, why the attack suddenly ended 06, 40 the DNA that sat unread for decades 08. 15 how a genealogy website cracked the case 10. 30 the psychology of a double life 12. 00 what this case changed forever based on court records, DOJ statements, and documented investigative reporting. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for a new cold case breakdown every day.